Representative Wittman.
Yes. Just call me Rob, please.
Just Rob. I like it. Well, our folks listening are not going to be able to see what we're seeing on the video here, but you look like a fishy dude, I would say. You're sunburnt, or maybe kissed is a more appropriate description. Wearing a fishing shirt and a fishing cap.
Yes.
And I understand that perhaps some of this is coming from your fishing background or personal experiences.
That is correct. That is correct. I worked for a number of years as a mate on a charter boat in the Outer Banks and also in the Chesapeake Bay, and I'm an avid recreational fisherman. So much of this has come from personal experience, whether it's off the Carolinas or in Florida, or for that matter, even on the West Coast. This is a problem that has really exploded in the past 5 years as far as shark populations and what's happening to recreational fisheries all across the spectrum. And it's not just the charter boat fishery, it's also private recreational fishermen that are dealing with this on a daily basis. So it's pretty significant.
And is this specific? Well, let's define what this is. Is this a anti-shark bill?
No, it's not. It's really about recognizing the incredible job that's been done by resource managers, fisheries managers in recovering this resource. For years, large coastal sharks were at low population levels. I would argue today they're at as high a level both in biomass and in spawning biomass as they have been, at least since we've been keeping records. Of course, it would be nice to get a little more scientific data on that, and that means we need to do more recent stock assessments. But if you look at this from an anecdotal standpoint, I would say the body of evidence anecdotally with what fishermen are experiencing and what we are seeing, that there is a tremendous recovery in shark populations. So this is all about how do we continue with healthy shark populations? And we know that we're in the middle of Shark Week on Discovery. So everybody is focused on sharks and shark populations and what we're doing there. They're incredible creatures. But what we want to make sure is somehow that there's a healthy coexistence, a healthy, as the scientific term goes, symbiotic relationship with recreational fishermen. And I would argue that's not in a symbiotic state right now. It is in a state where the sharks have a leg up. And listen, the sharks have become very conditioned to knowing where the easy meals come from. And it used to be in certain areas, you could go, but if you moved away from there, you could kind of get away from the sharks. I mean, anybody that's fished Marathon Lump knows you go there to catch a blackfin tuna. And, it used to be you could go there and you might be able to get, 50% of your tunas in. It's got to the point right now where you get 0% of your tunas in. You might get 1 out of 15. And right now, if you are in the sharks, you just have to move because it's not a winning game. We're seeing the same thing off the Outer Banks
of paying the tax man, right? You're hooking a tuna, and during that fight, those sharks key into that fish in distress and hit that relatively easy meal versus a free swimming tuna.
Yes. Yeah. In most situations, those sharks, although they're pretty good swimmers, wouldn't be able to chase down a free swimming tuna. Here, it's pretty easy for them to do that. And it's not just tunas there in Florida. It's off the East Coast. It's widespread on the East Coast now if you talk to charter fishermen there. It's also widespread on the inshore tarpon fishery. I know I go tarpon fishing in the springtime down in Florida, and whether it's big hammerheads or schools of bull sharks, it's pretty incredible what happens there when you're there at Boca Grande or any of those places. So it's widespread. It's also bottom fishermen. It used to be you didn't have to worry about that. Now you're fighting for your red snapper catch, even if there's only a couple of days of red snapper season on the East Coast. Now you have to try to find a weather window to go, but now you got to fight the sharks for getting 1 or 2 fish on board. So it's widespread, and we have to be able to address this. This is not about killing sharks. This is about how do we find innovative ways to coexist with sharks? How do we find ways to make sure that this isn't something that becomes catastrophic for the recreational fishing industry, especially in these coastal saltwater areas?
Well, yeah, I have to be honest with you. I am speaking to you from a landlocked state, Montana. Jordan is in Texas. Everything in Texas is very hot right now, and I'm sure he feels very far from the water and the cool sea breeze. But when we were first contacted, the response was, "Oh, shark populations are in decline." And that healthy shark population is often an indicator of an overall healthy fishery. And what I am seeing in the Shark Act is this isn't a direct address to the shark. It is a kind of a call to arms to find that data that you talked about. So establish a task force to identify and address critical needs with respect to shark depredation, asking for each regional fishery management council to have a representative, each marine fisheries commission to have a representative, the Fish and Wildlife Agency from each coastal state, regional fishery management councils. Long way of saying you're asking, and probably if this were to pass, it would be more than an ask, but a mandate to have somebody who represents all interests at one table and get on the same page as to some of these misnomers, what the population is doing in each region.
That's absolutely correct. We had a hearing yesterday on the bill. The National Marine Fisheries Service came in and said, "Oh no, don't worry about this. We're looking at this." Well, if they were doing something that was properly addressing the issue, then we wouldn't see this incredible rise in shark depredation and people losing their catch. So I want to make sure that we are understanding what this is about. This is about the proper balance. The shark population issue and where it is today, and determining what do we do going forward. Another thing too is we have to understand that a lot of the visions and ideas about where shark populations are today are based on stock assessments that are very old. So they are not current stock assessments. So, the first thing that needs to happen, I believe, and I think this panel will probably agree to that, is that, how do we get the most recent data on shark populations? And that's key. And then from there, what we have to do is to make sure that we are making determinations about what is the best step forward. I think if anybody talks to recreational fishermen pretty much anywhere along the U.S. coast, they will find that these interactions with fishermen and sharks, have grown exponentially. So the question then becomes twofold. First of all, what is it about shark populations that is there today? What is it about behavior of sharks that has changed? And obviously they're opportunistic. If they can get an easy meal, they're going to do that. So it's a matter of how do we address that? There's other folks that have tried different technologies out there, and we know that it's been done to try to prevent shark attacks. But, we're seeing this across the spectrum. And again, I understand that this is anecdotal, but that's why we put this bill in, is to try to get to some of the science behind this. You see headlines all the time. What do you see in the summertime? More shark interactions along the coast with swimmers. You see more and more of that. You see unbelievable pictures in shallow coastal areas of large schools of shark, blackfins and others, and people are going, "Wow, what in the world is going on?" So while all of that is anecdotal, I think it should beg the scientific question, okay, what's going on with sharks and what do we do about this? This is a human-shark interaction. So whether it's on a boat and eating somebody's catch before they can get it to the boat, I would say it's probably not a catch at that particular point, but it's the angling experience, or what's happening in these interactions in coastal areas with swimmers. All those things I think need to be addressed.
Yeah, and how do we determine if there's a lopsided shark population in certain areas, or if the population as a whole is, in an overabundant state? And
Yes.
the ocean's a giant place, so it seems like you are really trying to address that question in particular in the Shark Act, which I love to see. I mean, information is power here. Do you foresee the ability for recreational anglers to participate in the Shark Act by providing kind of citizen science information?
Absolutely. I think that's critically important. In fact, I've been a leader on the Natural Resources Committee to make sure that as we gather information, which is required under the Magnuson-Stevens Act to manage these fish populations, is that it's not just the data generated by fisheries managers and researchers in that realm, but it's also data that we gather from fishermen. Fishermen have an incredible depth and wealth of data. And while it may be observational, it's very easy to be able to take it and structure it in a way where it is objective data that can be used very, very skillfully in determining what's happening with populations. So yeah, we have to do both. We have to make sure that we do, the survey methodology to figure out what's out there, doing very structured surveying, sampling, as they call it. But then also use the information from fishermen, because the fishermen will give you the breadth and depth of information about where they are, where they're seeing these shark populations. And at the very least, that should inform fisheries managers about where they should look towards how these populations of sharks are manifesting themselves. So, it's kind of the same thing with the Gulf red snapper fishery. For years, the fisheries managers would go out and they do these trawl surveys and say, oh, guess what? There are no red snapper out there. And the fishermen would go, yeah, they're all over the place. We can't keep them off our hooks. And it turned out that the fisheries managers were going to sample in areas that weren't habitat for Gulf red snapper. They are bottom fish that relate to bottom structure. And if you fish out in areas where there's no bottom structure, you're not going to find them. So I think at the very least, recreational fishermen can do a great job at informing fisheries managers about where to go look and do their sampling, their stock assessment to determine, the true depth and breadth of shark populations.
Sure makes sense to me, other than the fact that we all know fishermen are pretty good at spinning a good yarn, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, listen, I've got a couple of comments back on this, and that is, how do we know, these aren't fish stories? I say, well, they're just too many for there to be fish stories. And then secondly, too, the other comment I get is, well, this is just sharks being sharks. Well, yeah, it is. I mean, sharks are predators. Sharks, are going to take advantages. They're going to be opportunistic feeders. But the question is, what are the things that we can do to assure that these economies in coastal areas that are dependent upon very robust charter fisheries can continue? People are not going to pay good money to go out and, contribute their catch to the sharks. A lot of these charter captains that I talk to say when we go out, the first one or two fish that get eaten by a shark, it's kind of amusing for the folks on board. They like it. Oh, that's cool. They said, but by the time you're into the fifth, sixth, and seventh fish, and there's nothing in the fish box except, mouths and gill covers of the fish that you've hooked, all of a sudden the amusement goes right out the door. So I think it's incredibly important for us to look at, what is this issue? And it's more than sharks just being sharks. And it's more than the element of saying, well, there are a few fishermen that are telling some fish tales. I think there's a lot to this. And our effort is to try to make sure that we are guiding this by a very thoughtful collection of scientific data. And then from that, using that effort to determine what are the best management decisions to make sure that we can minimize. You'll never do away with these interactions. You're never going to be in a situation where sharks don't take somebody's catch. But the key is how do we look at different realms to be able to reduce the impact on that? And it used to be it was manageable, even if it was 50-50. But, now that it's, 90-10 or 95-5, it's becoming a problem.
Are you aware of, what management decisions that could potentially be made off of this data? Deterrence or, species specific harvest increases for some of these shark species. What could an end result be in your opinion?
Sure. Well, listen, there's a shark fishery. It's very, very small right now. And in many instances, a lot of folks have actually gotten out of the commercial fishery for sharks for a whole variety of reasons. And that's kind of a separate discussion. But I think that what this should do is to look at, where these shark populations are they focused on where these recreational fishing opportunities are, where these other fish like tunas and others are abundant and where fishermen go to catch them. And if that's the case, let's look at, some of the the technology that's out there. There's some technology that uses sound and other energy sources to try to repel the sharks. And I've talked to fishermen. Some of them in certain situations are somewhat successful. Some in other situations are not. So I think it begs the question to look at all the different opportunities and technology that you could use to reduce this shark depredation. As I said, you're not gonna completely eliminate it, but to look at what's the proper combination there. And again, I want to emphasize this is about making sure that we sustain healthy shark populations. Nobody wants to go in and say, well, let's catch all these sharks out and reduce populations. We understand, that they're an incredibly important part of the ecosystem. And, these apex predators are pretty amazing. We absolutely want them to be there. The key is how do we make sure that we can coexist? And I think that's the key to this legislation, is asking those questions, getting that information so we can make sound management decisions on how we have healthy, sustainable shark populations, but also those great recreational fishing opportunities that people spend a lot of money on each year, whether it's tackle or boats or those sorts of things. Those are incredibly important parts of economies in coastal areas. But for that matter, even inland, there are a lot of boat companies in the inland areas that make boats that these recreational fishermen purchase. And these are, incredibly expensive platforms. So we want to make sure that opportunity continues.
And do you we've kind of talked largely about your constituency here and their experiences. Do you have a experience of your own where you kind of came to the hard fact conclusion of something's different now than it was then?
I have. Like I said, I do some tarpon fishing down in Florida, and it used to be occasionally you'd have an interaction with a shark and a tarpon. I've had a couple times where hammerheads have, chased down the tarpon, and I'll just open the bail and let the tarpon swim away, or sometimes try to break them off. Although I don't like to do that, because today with these braids, if you break off a long stretch of braid behind a fish, it's not good for them. So try to do that. And listen, I was in Boca Grande Pass one day, and the most incredible scene you could ever see, and that is at a school of bull sharks, and these were big bull sharks, come up and eat a tarpon. That was probably about 130 pounds, and they ate that tarpon all the way down to the gill plates in about 45 seconds. So just unbelievable. They are Mother Nature's wonder when it comes to being able to eat and eat with a vengeance. So I've seen that. I've had the same thing too when I've gone tuna fishing and then too going out. It used to be you could go out and go fishing for redfish or red drum, and you really never had to worry about it, because the red drum would be right in feeding with the sharks many times. But I've had recently where we've had big redfish, 40 or 50 pound redfish, get eaten by sharks. And that's a new phenomenon. So those are some personal experiences that I've had that I look at and go, something has changed. And it's not just changing a little bit around the edges, it's changing exponentially.
That's interesting. And yeah, boy, the tarpon's a beautiful fish, and you want to keep them around. They're long lived and, incredible sport fish, but watching a big red drum get smashed and not being able to eat it yourself is a different matter, right? So
it is. Yeah, that's table fare there. And the same with the tuna. You look at it and you go, hey, I've waited, to go on that charter fishing trip. You're waiting in anticipation, and you can taste the tuna, and then all of a sudden the shark gets your tuna. It's a little disappointing. So
absolutely. So we've kind of talked about a little bit of the framework here, and we'll definitely cover it a little bit deeper outside of your time. I personally like what I'm seeing here. Again, it's a call to arms to provide management specialists from all over to get to the same table and look at this holistically, is the word I would use. And I really like that. Who likes this and who doesn't like it? Who do you have support from? Who is giving you a hard time on this one?
Well, listen, we've got a whole wide group of organizations that are very focused on sustainable fisheries, folks like the American Sport Fishing Association, the Guy Harvey Foundation, and there's no stronger proponent of healthy marine ecosystems than Guy Harvey. We also have the National Marine Manufacturers Association, the Teddy Roosevelt Foundation. I mean, all of these are organizations that are well known for their balanced and thoughtful approach to fisheries management. So we've got a wide spectrum across the board. There are a number of other groups too, and I'll make sure that we send those to you. But those are I would say the four that I would highlight as a really wide and diverse group of organizations that say, yeah, we need to look at this. And listen, they were very thoughtful and helpful in with us in helping to craft the legislation. They said, listen, here are the folks that you want to involve in trying to get together the scientific body of knowledge to make the best decisions on this. There's nobody in this group that says, hey, let's go out and, take out shark populations. Everyone there understands the true value of sharks, but they want to make sure that there's that balance.
And where are we at in the progress of this legislation? We heard you say that you've had one hearing, or can you just give us an idea on the timeline and who would be the best people to call if our listeners want to comment on the Shark Act?
Absolutely. Well, it had a hearing in the subcommittee, which is the first step for a bill to actually get before the full committee and go through a process called a markup. And that is, you bring the bill before the committee. And if anybody says, hey, I want to change this or change that, they have an opportunity to submit amendments to make changes to the bill. And then once the committee reports it out, its next step is to go to the House floor to be voted on. And then at that particular point, it would have to go over to the Senate side in order for the Senate to pass the bill. So we are at the very beginning stages of the process. But the good news is that we got a hearing. We had a great group of witnesses, and I think all the members had some very, very good questions about what the bill does and how it's addressing this issue of shark depredation. And listen, shark depredation is occurring everywhere. So it wasn't like members were saying, oh, it's not occurring in my area. Every member that asked a question was acknowledging the extent of the issue. So that's where it is right now. We're hopeful here that when we get back to Washington in September, that it is put on the full committee's agenda to actually go through the markup and get passed, and then to be able to get to the House floor.
Excellent. Well, be sure to keep us posted when we get to both the Senate and House level. Would love to talk about this again.
Sure. And we can also, as part of your question too, you asked who could your listeners contact. They can contact our office. You can just go to Wittman, that's wittman.house.gov. And you can also contact other members of the Natural Resource Committee. So you can go to U.S. House of Representatives. You can go to that website and just go to the Natural Resources Committee. It'll give you a list of those members. And in that list, it'll give you their email addresses and their website. So you can there's a portal on all their websites where you can go and send your comments to them via email. So I would go to, and you can Google if you want to go directly to Natural Resource Committee, U.S. House of Representatives, and that'll give you the list, and then they'll give you their email addresses, and you can mail directly to the members on the committee. And for a lot of listeners, these will be members that will be from your state or your Commonwealth. So I think it's a great opportunity to express your thoughts and ideas about this.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that. And, obviously very appreciative of your time. I got to tell you that the reason I'm looking a little haggard and sweaty right now is I've committed to a very expensive bluefin tuna trip.
Oh, yes.
For spearfishing.
Wow.
And I got to shock my lungs back into shape so I can get a decent breath hold and try to keep up. Humans don't keep up very well with bluefin, but you really don't have a chance if your beer belly's grown to the size of mine, if I'm being honest.
Man, I'll tell you. Cal, are you going to the Canadian waters area? Or are you going out to the West Coast? Where are you going to go to try to spearfish them?
West Coast.
West Coast, yeah. Oh, the bluefin fishery there. What a phenomenal comeback. The bluefin fishery there. I have some friends of mine that fish out there, and the recreational fishing opportunity there is just off the hook. I mean, the number of 300-pound plus bluefin they're catching is just incredible. So,
it's absolutely wild. It really is. And coming in so close to shore, making them very accessible to a lot of people, a lot of different vessel sizes. So It is very exciting right now, but also lots of great questions about that connectivity of the ocean that we
Yes.
don't know a lot about. So,
Right. Well, when you talk about the West Coast there, I used to do a lot of long range fishing out of San Diego on the long range boats there, and we would go to several fishing locations there. And when we would have notoriously great whites would hang out around the boat, and they would take their pick of the yellowfin tuna that we were catching. So quite the experience there. Of course, that was pretty neat because it was a single shark, and there was only so much the shark would do. And a lot of times they'd come and eat a few tunas, and it doesn't take long after they ate 3, 4, 5 80-pound tunas before they said, okay. Even the biggest sharks say, okay, I'm full, I'm gone. These other situations are multiple sharks. So, right. But it's still an amazing thing to see. And sometimes too, the sharks would just show up at the boat and have no interest in eating. They just were curious. So, but it's nothing like a big great white.
And that's something that, listeners should know is these are amazing animals. They are amazing. I certainly feel fortunate when I get to see them, especially speaking from a landlocked state, but just as a comparative example, I went out on Lake Erie last week and fished with a friend of mine and was having so much fun catching big white drum.
Oh, yeah.
All like crazy. They're great, but there's not a lot of people targeting them and taking them home specifically. So they are an overabundant population. And for all the good experiences that they provide, eventually you get sick of catching them. And you wish that more folks were taking them home. So,
well, listen, I appreciate you all's interest in this. We'll make sure that we keep you plugged in, keep your listeners plugged in too. This is really, there's two parts of this, Cal. There's one, and that is what an incredible management success story in the recovery of these shark populations. And now the key is how do we take the next step? And that is strike that balance, that symbiotic relationship between, fishermen and sharks. And I think there's a tremendous amount of respect for fishermen that they have for these sharks and how incredible they are. And the key is, how do we do that in ways that we can enjoy the sharks and enjoy our opportunity to go fishing?